Hi, it's February 2021. Welcome to the second of our videos where we show you how we transform our boring back garden into a colourful display in late summer. I'm Geoff.
I'm Heather. As promised in last month's video, we're going to show you around the greenhouse. You are very lucky because the only time I'm invited to the greenhouse is when I'm taking Geoff a drink of coffee or tea.
Firstly, I want to tell you about a couple of things that have changed in January. Firstly, we had a new shed. That was the good news. But the bad news was that I fell over in the snow and I broke my wrist. I'm not looking forward to the rest of the summer now unless it heals. Before I take you in the greenhouse, I want to show you a couple of things happening in the garden. Firstly, we've got a few snowdrops coming up, which lightens the heart. And secondly, we've got a salvia here called Royal Bumble, which I leave out all winter. But as I show you when I go in the greenhouse, I do have an insurance policy. One of my favourite salvias is called Amistad. I chop that down to the ground and cover it with leaves and then put wire over the top of it to stop the birds digging it up. But as you'll see, again, I have an insurance policy in the greenhouse. Now, if you're expecting to go in the greenhouse and see a big array of dahlias being raised under artificial lights and heat, you're going to be disappointed because I don't grow dahlias in that way. I think I ought to provide a bit of context before I go in though. I think the best way to do that is to show you a video that I took last summer and taught you through things. Here's a video I made last August. I call myself Dahliaholic, so obviously there are lots of dahlias in the garden, but I think without plants like these yellow argyranthemums, the red salvia, Royal Bumble, and the tall pink ones, the garden wouldn't look quite as good, would it? Some more salvias there, more dahlias. More salvias at the front and then marigolds next to them. There's a lovely pink fuchsia that I'm very fond of. Another Royal Bumble. And you can see all the pots that we grow. Tubs with fuchsias, nemesias, more salvias. There's one of my favourite salvias called Amistad. So, welcome to my greenhouse. It's 20 feet long and 8 feet wide. I've got no artificial heat and the only light we're getting here is from the sun. To try to conserve the heat, I've lined the greenhouse with plastic. This manages to keep the frost out of here, but it still does go cold. It's been down to -3 this winter. Now you might be asking, where are your dahlias? Well, they're all the tubers are in a big box under these duvets and the boards. I won't be getting them out until the end of the winter, probably late March, but again, that will depend on how my wrist is. In the meantime, it's a great place to store soft perennials. For example, here are some nemesias. It's surprising that they do overwinter quite well. In fact, there's one here that's even in flower. Even a lobelia has survived. In September, I take cuttings of argyranthemums. They survive happily in the cold greenhouse. Then around April, I'll take more cuttings from them. By June, I should have sufficient to plant out into the garden to make a good display. I particularly like the mixture of yellow argyranthemums and blue verbena rigida. The main plants that I try to overwinter in the greenhouse are my fuchsias, some of which I grow in tubs, others in the ground, and my salvias. I grow about 25 varieties of salvias. Most of them are grown between the bedding plants at the front of the bed and the dahlias behind. A variety of fuchsia that I particularly like is called Waltz Jubiltine. I like it because it grows quite tall. and so it fills the gap between the bedding plants at the front of the bed and the taller dahlias behind. But above all, I love it for its flowers. Most fuchsias have flowers that hang down and look at the soil, but Waltz jubaltine has flowers that look up at you and smile. With regards to salvias, I grow about 20 or 30 varieties. Some of them are quite hardy, but some others aren't. But I make sure that I've got at least one of every variety in the greenhouse so that they definitely overwinter. This one's the tall growing amistad. This one's Royal Bumble, the one you saw growing outside. It's supposed to be hardy, and usually it survives okay, but I always bring one in for the winter just in case. It has loads of lovely bright red flowers for the full summer. The final salvia I want to talk to you about is called Cerro Potosi. A great thing about it is that it's very easy to split into separate plants. I divided this plant into 3 separate stems, 3 separate plants which are growing well. With all the salvias and all the fuchsias, I'll do exactly the same thing. I'll chop them down to the lowest growing shoot. Whatever happens, these guys are going to have to be out of the greenhouse by the time I get my dahlias out of storage. Before I finish in the greenhouse, I wanted to show you these scissors. They're Bonsai pruning scissors, and I use them for chopping up my dahlia tubers. There are lots of different makes on the market. I think these are called Zenport. They're strong, they're sharp, and the pointed end makes them very good for getting into the fiddly bits on a tuber. That makes them great for dividing tubers into separate parts, though they'll probably work even better if you didn't have a broken wrist. Finally, I want to talk about compost. People often ask me what compost do I use for potting up my tubers. Some growers would tell you that they use 10 parts this, 5 parts that, 4 parts the other. All I would say is that I buy the cheapest, or what happens to be on special offer at the time. To my mind, for large rooted plants like fuchsias, salvias and dahlias, it doesn't really matter the quality of the compost that you grow them in pots. So long as there are sufficient nutrients in the compost to keep them going for a couple of months before you plant them out, that's okay. They're only going to live in the pot for a couple of months at the most. They're going to be planted out in the garden where there are plenty of nutrients, especially from the compost that I put in spadefuls underneath them. So that's it with the greenhouse, folks. I hope to make the next video at the end of March. By that time the weather should have warmed up a bit and my wrist might have stopped aching. But before I go, I want to show you this fuchsia. It's called Coral. It's one of my favourites. I dug it up, brought it indoors into the greenhouse, but as you can see, there are no sign of any shoots, and I doubt that it's going to survive. And this is where my final insurance policy comes into play. We're now in our porch. There's no heat in here apart from the sun, but it does stay considerably warmer than the greenhouse over winter. So for varieties that I'm not confident are going to overwinter in the greenhouse, in September I take a cutting. I pot them into tiny pots, and here's Coral. And finally, there are types of plants that I know I'm going to find it very difficult to overwinter. For example, I'm very keen on million bells, the very small petunias. I've given up on trying to overwinter them, but what I do is buy new plants in spring. I buy them as soon as they become available, then I'll use them to take cuttings from. I bought these in late January, but I'm pretty confident that by the time I plant them out in May, I'll have at least 4 or 5 extras of each variety. Oh, lovely.